Look, people, Trump didn't need to come along for social programs to be in trouble, but he surely is not going out of his way to protect them either. This is a long story in American politics. First, we have the ostensible fear of big government. Do you really want it reaching into your healthcare and retirement? Most Republicans, and more than a few Democrats, place in question the ability of government to handle such complex undertakings. And it is undeniable that this same reaction can be elicited quite easily across the political culture. Americans, perhaps North Americans, have a different relationship to the state than we find in other OECD countries. We are less comfortable with its presence in our lives. North Americans don't talk about the state, just government, which can be disposed of and replaced by popular command. Add to this the ongoing claim, since at least the 1980s, that this cradle-to-grave existence, consolidated in the post-war era, has run its course. It's irresponsible, they say, and we can't sustain it fiscally. America needs to fashion market-based alternatives to these supposedly dying systems, rather than propping them up until their inevitable collapse. There are, of course, counter-arguments to both of these claims, but there's no avoiding the fact that in an individualized and market-heavy political culture, these are regularly brushed away, with, of course, the help of both political parties. Still, the social state in the US, for all of its faults, has continued to grow, albeit on an incremental and piecemeal basis. Today, we want to ask the question whether the current administration marks a break in that trend. We ask whether the administration, in its flurry of activity, also intends to dismantle cherished social programs. And to what end? What could this possibly achieve politically? And if it brings only negative political returns, why do it in the first place? So join us on Angry and Verklempt as we consider the assault on democracy as an assault on the social. Hey,
Hey, cheers.
cheers.
Excellent open. Excellent open.
Oh, great,
I really,
great.
I mean, like, I really hope that people don't shy away by the topic that we're having today, because it gets into this questions of policy and so on. And but like this is where the real politics happens.
Yeah, it's right. I mean, this is the kind of, in some ways, it's the humdrum of politics, but if laid out in a way that makes sense to people, I think it's actually quite exciting stuff.
This is what apparently all these mad people are mad about. This is what drives me crazy. They don't even know what the hell they're mad about half the freaking time.
Yeah.
And if they actually sat down and really, asked some very simple, basic questions about, social programs and social policy, they would understand that, hey, I don't like what any of these guys are doing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's right. And the other thing too is that it's a big topic. It's, we tend to think of it as some kind of sub-pillar of maybe political science, but in fact it's not. It's an entire array in and of itself.
Sociology, psychology, anthropology, geography, history, it's all there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So how's your week?
That's right. Oh, pretty good. We got a lot of views. You saw we're climbing. We tripled our viewership.
Thank you, friends.
This week.
And viewers.
Thank you, friends.
Thank you.
But we still need people to press that
subscribe button.
That subscribe button.
Like, tell your friends, man. Tell your friends. Like, I know, like, I don't want this to be self-serving in the sense that you think that we're trying to advance something here, but we're really trying to kind of like, I think this is going to sound, I hope this doesn't sound self-absorbed, but we're trying to open up a space here where people can actually talk about politics, like, the way they used to, like in the pub,
Yeah, but we're not going to do a call-in show.
No, but we're going
Julian.
to
No matter how, no matter how much you beg me, we're never doing a call-in show.
Listen, I remember in the late 1980s, early 1990s, when CBC Northern Ontario started to have this oldie goldie, voicemail box or answering machine, and they would take calls.
Right.
And I got in one time, and I said, listen, I don't know what the hell you guys are doing here, but this is fucking dangerous. We don't want people's opinions on everything, because what do they say? Careful what you wish for, you might get it. And this whole talk radio thing, this to me is a malignancy on the body politic. And it makes people think that they're exercising some kind of political. We're going to have some interaction, but it's not going to be some kind of phone-in show. Listen, I hate to break it to you, Roddy and I really believe in democracy, but this is not a democracy.
This is not a democracy. This is our platform. Yeah. So good week. I guess now we're in the third episode, so that puts us in the upper 10.
I got to share this with you.
10 percentile.
I'm sorry, we were a little bit late taping today, but I am so happy to report that Barcelona beat Real Madrid in the Copa del Rey final in extra time. And it makes me so happy this year that the Real Housewives of Real Madrid, of Manchester United, and Juventus are not going to win anything.
Well, there we go. We are a little late, and we have to do it tonight because I have my sporting event tomorrow, which is even more obscure. Liège-Bastogne-Liège is running tomorrow, which is one of the 5 great cycling monuments. It's I think 280 kilometer cycling race in Belgium. And, the great Tadej Pogačar is going to be competing.
This guy is like a marvel.
He is extraordinary. He's an athlete like no other.
He's a cyborg. Okay? Yeah. But listen, I want to say something too. I hope you assholes out there don't think that Roddy and I got some kind of hoity-toity, hipster thing because he's into cycling and I'm into football. These are the sports of the people, you sons of bitches.
That's right.
We don't watch them over here, okay?
That's right. Okay, so we need to move on to our topic. We've had a lot of news activity around this, but really in many ways, a lot of kind of polemical references, right? A lot of claims about, the end of Medicare and the end of Social Security, with, not any kind of sustained basis upon which we can really make an assessment. People aren't journalists, news programs, platforms, they're not laying out the facts, as it were, in terms of what's going on and what potentially is in danger. I got this just a little example of that. Representative Maxwell Frost, not that long ago, I guess it's been, over a month now, got up in front of Congress and made this kind of claim. And I think it's indicative of the kinds of claims, that are being made about what's happening in the Trump administration. So I'll play that and we'll move on the other side.
A minute.
Mr. Speaker, what we're seeing right now is nothing short of a great betrayal. Donald Trump, President Elon Musk, and every single Republican in this chamber that voted to advance the Republican budget resolution last night have been looking their constituents in the face and lying. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP, programs that millions of Americans rely on to survive, they want to make cuts to. They want to tear apart the safety net that millions of seniors, veterans, disabled folks, working people, and over 38 million children rely on. They're willing to leave you and your families to suffer, and after they voted for the bill, they clapped about it. Why? Because in a few months, they want to pass massive tax cuts for billionaires and mega corporations, and they want your children and your grandparents to pay for it. This isn't just about politics. It's an attack on everybody that has to clock in and out every day for work. Yesterday, House Republicans wanted to forcibly remove me from a committee for calling out this administration's grift, but they don't have a single damn thing to say when it comes to protecting health care for children and seniors.
So every time I see Maxwell Frost, think to myself, what have I done with my
I
life?
know.
I
Anyway,
these young whippersnappers.
that party is so deep in talent at that young level. I don't know why this comes to mind, but I remember in the early 1990s, Frank Zappa saying something to the effect of that when the Americans have an election, right, the whole world should be allowed to vote because essentially, the
Yeah.
policies and the president of the United States are basically going to ripple through the world. And, I can't help but hear this guy speak and think of what's going on in Canada. And, the contrasts are just so, like, what happened. How did they used to say, if they sneeze, we catch pneumonia, right? You can see
Yeah.
that influence. And it's what I find remarkable, though, is this strain in the Democratic Party that really, like, they're far more developed than Canadians are when it comes to defending social policy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that Canadians tend to be very deferential to the policy that exists
Exactly.
and don't really pay a great deal of attention to it, and have very little conception of the what the policy array is in the United States. And we want to get to that a little
Sure.
bit, I think, a bit later on. I think we want to lay that out a bit. But before we do that, like let's follow Frost's logic there and sort of lay out what we think is the state of affairs. Like, what do we think the state of affairs is in terms of the attack on social programs? Because I was, thumbing through various articles today, and I came across a USA Today article that listed 100 of the most egregious actions of the Trump administration in the first 100 days. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go through this systematically. And I did. And what did I find? Well, I found number 48, which was the dismissal of, thousands of personnel from the education department. And number 84, that states were told they could no longer use Medicaid funds for gender affirming care. And that was the only mention in 100 items of any social policy. Which, sort of left me a bit gobsmacked, to be honest. Not that those two things aren't significant, but that, it really doesn't give you a picture in any way of what's going on.
I want to add something else here. I don't know if this is too premature or at the same time it complicates matters, but it should be taken into consideration that the key features of what we're looking at to are also kind of, they're mitigated against the American federal system, which Canadians should know something about, because you have these kind of like state level variations, right? Where there's the states have certain latitude in designing and administrating social policies, and they lead to differences in eligibility requirements, benefit levels, program structures. And as much as you may not think of it, but if you think of you compare in the Canadian context, you will notice that kind of state level variation could be like radically different for a certain sector of people than it is for another place, geographically speaking. And I think that, that's kind of what gets key, right? Because the people in New Mexico are not going to get the same kind of social policies in upstate New York. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And we're going to get to that. I think we need to talk about that, particularly with respect to Medicaid, because that's where, the rubber really hits the road. But on Medicaid, I mean, I think it's important to mention that, that's something that seems within the budget resolution to be a direct target, right? So we have to, we got to establish that right from the outset. The Energy and Commerce Committee has been directed to find $880 billion in cuts.
This is astronomical. Okay. Like,
yeah, it is astronomical.
But what's unbelievable at the same time, okay? And like, particularly as we're finding out with this Doge bullshit, right, as they've come in, right, is that these are fundamental to the running of the U.S. economy.
Yeah. Which I think, which is why, the only people protesting are not just citizens and action groups. Industry, in fact, is protesting quite loudly, but we can get to that. On top of, I should say that the Energy and Commerce Committee, although they deal with a number of different items, one of their primary responsibilities is health, budgetary issues around health. And because Medicare and Social Security are sectioned off in the budget, they can't actually touch that. So the target will be Medicaid, undeniably.
Roddy, you got to do me a favor. I know this might be.
Yeah.
Do you remember those commercials that we would see on MSNBC with Joe Namath and J.J. Walker from
Sure.
Good Times,
Sure.
right? Tell these people what those commercials were all about.
Yeah, I'm going to do that. But let's get through the state of affairs first, and we will talk about that. We will talk about, because that relates to Medicare, care for seniors. Yeah, it is huge. Okay, so let me just list some of the stuff. Okay, so we have the Inflation Reduction Act, along with the American Recovery Act, created a bunch of subsidies around private health care. So if you couldn't get Medicaid and you couldn't get healthcare through your work, you could purchase individual plans, and the government was subsidizing this in an accelerated way from COVID forward, making those individual plans actually affordable. And so the individual insurance market grew from some 10 million. Now it's approaching 25 million.
We should say this from the beginning, right? Once those programs grew, right? The key here, people have to understand this from the beginning. The whole get-go is to lock people in.
That's right. Okay? But here, the problem is that those subsidies are in the IRA only until the end of this year.
Yeah.
And that means that the Trump administration doesn't have to do a goddamn thing. And they can eliminate subsidies for millions of Americans.
And they'll die on the vine.
And it'll die on the vine. Not that there won't be political protest around that, but I mean, people need to be aware, I think, that, it's not all about actions that the Trump administration is taking. It's also about inaction, right? Not extending those subsidies is not affirming the growth in healthcare coverage that took place from COVID forward. Okay, so some other things. They are slow walking and rearranging the negotiations that were in, again, the Inflation Reduction Act that were supposed to lower pharmaceutical prices to the benefit of pharmaceutical companies. I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but they basically expanded the period in which you could look at small molecule drugs, blah, blah, blah. You don't want to know about, that kind of detail. But the point is that pharmaceutical companies were put in a much more advantageous position there on pricing, which is precisely what the Biden administration was trying to avoid in the Inflation Reduction.
I want to insert something here at this point. I think that much of what has to be kind of this has to be thought of with the big backdrop of shortly after the 2016 election, you had Steve Bannon, who vows to pursue the deconstruction of the administrative state. Okay, now all of this has to be discussed within that idea. I mean, and what do people think of when they hear administrative state, right? It's just like a very new term for many people, not just Americans, but everywhere around the world. It's the bureaucracy. Okay, it's what implements policy. It's what makes sure that what Roddy's talking about, all these programs to filling the potholes in your town, to making sure that your toilet doesn't back up, to make sure you don't get E. coli by eating romaine lettuce that didn't get washed properly, or get listeriosis from the fucking goddamn salami sandwich you had while sitting in the sun with no shirt on. Okay. Which is also, and it's really important to understand, because this has been part of the fabric of government around the world since the late 19th century, right? And there's parts of it that are constitutional, and that raises questions about who controls it, who limits its face, and when and if there should be significant change, right?
Yeah. And I think, to that, maybe we're going off on a bit of a early tangent here, but, I also think that those processes that you're talking about tend to be, they're slow. They involve a lot of email chains. It takes a long time to get anything done. And this is the subject of, Ezra Klein's abundance argument. And, on one level, I agree with that whole argument that, government needs to be more productive and more innovative and have more vision. But on the other hand, I think it dismisses a really big part of exactly what you're talking about, the administrative state. When the state is administering these programs, yes, it's slow. Yes, it has protocols. But the flip side of that protocol, the flip side of all those chained emails is accountability.
Big time.
That you can actually see the process. And I think that, if you don't have that, then you have the Pete Hegseths, on Signal Chat, trying to avoid the channels that are transparent.
Yeah.
The channels that go into the record, the channels that help us as citizens understand decision-making processes and how monies get apportioned around healthcare, around Social Security, around food stamps, whatever the case may be.
But this is the point, right?
So these,
most citizens don't really have a good sense of understanding how these programs operate, right? And what is awful about it is that we've kind of been socialized to believe that it's not worth getting a sense of. Don't worry, somebody will take care of it, right? Or I'm not getting it anyways. I saw some fucking banana today in some kind of thread on Facebook saying, Trudeau hasn't done anything for me in the last 10 years. And I felt like saying, you fucking idiot. Like during COVID, he did he gets critical, like he kept our head above water.
Yeah, there was no winning, I think, in that situation.
Yeah,
but let's stay on track here.
I'm trying to keep the meta here, right? I'm trying to keep the big issues because I don't want people to get bored about the fact.
Don't worry. No, I think you're worried that we're not going to come back to those, Julian.
I'm worried that we're going to get shut down because people think that this is mumbo jumbo. Like we're not talking about sexy things like why Pete Hegseth is a fucking moron, for example. Okay.
Sure, but they care about, for instance,
You're right.
They care about the cut of 20,000 workers at Health and Human Services. They care about the cancellation of research dollars for the NIH and the FDA, for that matter. They care about the 7,000 layoffs at the Social Security Administration.
Sure.
They care about the closing of regional offices. They care, all these things, they start to pile up and affect people's lives, and they cannot access those previously accountable policies.
And you should add the dynamic here, right? And as these kind of governments are always freaking out about the fiscal belt, right? They kind of I use this word, anorexorize, okay? They kind of created a kind of anorexic bureaucracy that functions, but can never really function in a manner. Speaking of somebody who's worked in the bureaucracy now for almost 10 years, they function, but they can't function in a manner that is really, really effectual or quote unquote, I love innovative, okay? Innovative in the sense that the cuts have been so deep to government that they're basically catching, and in a lot of instances, they're writing regulations with like one hand and one leg tied behind their back, right? And this is why a lot of this stuff takes, and it all comes from this fucking nonsense that less government, less administration is better. And you know what? The facts don't bore that out, people, okay? Yeah. Oliver Wendell Jones once said, I like taxes. Taxes create civilization.
Yeah, that's right. They buy me civilization. Yeah. And he was Oliver Wendell Jones was no radical.
Oh no, not at
all. Okay, so we didn't list them all, but I think we got a sense that there are multiple prongs in which this administration, I think, is coming. Some of it very underhanded. And we can get to how that, spells doom. But I think before we do that, we have a lot of, I don't know how many exactly, but we certainly have Canadian listeners whose eyes glaze over when you talk about social policy, not because they're not interested, I don't think, but because they simply don't understand how American social policy works. And I frankly think a lot of Americans don't understand the global picture with American social policy. It's too complex.
At the basic level, right? I think it's the same, right? And they can understand the wider issues. Sorry, I got my notes across 3 or 4 different screens here, so bear with me. One of the things that I made note of, right, is one of the things that the Canadians should be what they should understand. Sorry, there we go. Where did I put it? Okay, I just put one of my. There we go. Is that they know things about social insurance programs, Social Security, right, which is retirement, disability, survivor benefits, Medicare, which is healthcare for the elderly, and so on, and employment insurance. These are major federal programs, right? They know things about means-tested programs, right? Food stamps, for example, temporary assistance for needy families, and all of that stuff. Then what they also know about, and this is the one that drives me crazy, because neocons and neoliberals and centrists and whatever, they'll behave like as if the economy is this mess of it's like hieroglyphics, and that the common person cannot possibly understand it. That's one of the triumphs of neoliberalism, in my opinion. But that's a load of shit, okay? Because what people do understand the role of privatization. They do, and they do know the role of the private sector in Canada in particular, but also in the United States. They also know about these ideas of public-private partnerships, right? And that has been a way to kind of slowly privatize social policy, right?
Certainly in Canada, yeah.
And they don't understand this. But I mean, here's the deal, right? We're old enough to remember that if you broke your ankle playing hockey on the street or at the rink late at night, and you went to the emergency back in the day, hey, they actually had government-run physiotherapy clinics, okay? But now they've privatized all of that, and I mean, everything is now kind of like public-private partnership, where you have to pay some fee or some kind of fee. That never used to exist, right?
Yeah. I mean, in the case of clinics and stuff, that is public-private partnership. But I would tend to say in the U.S., what you have more is private provision, some public purchasing of social benefits, and some funneled private purchasing.
Is this a good time for the commercials?
Benefits. Yeah, it might be.
Yeah.
Let's do a commercial.
Because this was our favorite thing, because those commercials used to drive me fucking crazy on MSNBC. They used to be on every time there was a break. You get half drunk, Joan is, hey people, what's going on. It's kind of like that Tom Selleck kind of, the reverse mortgage bullshit. And then you have J.J. Walker, Dynamite, just playing that maudlin character from the 70s.
Only MSNBC viewers are going to know what you're talking about, or maybe it's on CNN as well. But what Julian's referring to are Medicare enrollment commercials, and what they do is and this is one of the ways in which privatization has taken hold within Medicare, is that they ask you to send in your postal code, and based on that postal code, they decide whether a plan is available for you from the private sector in your county. And those are not just available willy-nilly. Those counties are chosen on a cherry-picking basis. That is to say, United Health, CMS, the companies that are involved in Medicare Advantage, they pick those counties because they are the healthier counties. That is to say, they will have to pay out the least benefits in those counties, even though when they submit their information to the government, they upcode the individuals in the plan so that they get more money from the government, but pay out less to the individuals. And of course, they choose people who were of the generation, Joe Namath, J.J. Walker. I mean, senior citizens were watching those people in their youth, and so they identify with those people.
Am I that old now?
Well, that is the way it is. That's the way it is. Okay, you jumped ahead again. You got us off to the races. Okay, but so let's lay out just Social Security and healthcare, because I think laying out Social Security and healthcare gets at some of the fundamental problems you were talking about. The public-private split on the one hand, but also the federal-state split on the other. Okay, so Social Security, I think, is one of the simplest programs. And it's simple because everybody pays into it, and everybody gets something from it. It's a contributory program. It's capped at a certain level Above a certain level, you don't pay into the tax anymore. And its budget is hived off from the federal budget. Okay, it's based on the payroll tax. And so that money pays for Social Security representatives, or recipients now, and any excess goes into the Social Security trust
What
funds.
kind of coverage are they getting when they pay that money?
Well, they'll get, their benefits will be based on, their income through their lifetime and stuff, just like CPP in Canada. It's the same idea, effectively.
The deductibles
But we
are part and parcel.
no, not on Social Security, but that Social Security is taxed when they receive it.
Let's examine this for a second. So this idea that there is no Medicare a la Canadian style in the United States.
Well, there is to some degree, but that's not okay. So that's a contributory program. Medicare is healthcare for seniors, right? But healthcare is a much bigger umbrella. It's not just Medicare. But the original form of Medicare is very similar to Medicare offered in Canada.
See?
It is a single payer healthcare system.
Okay, so what is the fear here for these citizens in terms of being insured or not insured? Like, we're told the horror stories, right? Somebody breaks an arm, it's costing them $50,000, right? Somebody gets, God forbid, diagnosed with a treatable form of cancer, it could mean financial ruin, right? You know what I mean? Like, where is the truth in this, and where is the fact? What is exactly like?
So the truth is, and you won't be surprised to hear this, it's, a really highly varied field, right? And that, of course, it's a kind of divide and conquer strategy. Everybody has something different. So healthcare breaks down into 4 major pillars in the United States. You've got the majority of people, about 160 million people, just under 50%, get their healthcare through work plans, right? Their employer sets up, either their own healthcare coverage or they ally with a health insurer. That's part of their benefits package at work. But those plans are highly variegated, like across the board. The plan you get in one company is not going to be the same as a plan you get in another. And most of them are not portable. So it's going to depend, your healthcare is very much dependent on your work. So that's the first major pillar. And the second major pillar is Medicare, which we already mentioned. Okay. The third is Medicaid. Medicaid is for people that are, in its first instance, below 100% of the federal poverty line, but under the ACA, below 138% of the federal
So not everybody is facing financial ruin if they get sick in the United States.
Well, wait a second. Okay, so I want to lay this out. The fourth pillar of healthcare is the individual marketplace. So if you don't have healthcare through work, maybe your employer is too small, maybe you don't have a job, but you have some money and you don't qualify for Medicaid, and you're somewhere in between, the only way for you to get healthcare is to purchase it. And one of the things the ACA did was set up a series of marketplaces from state to state to state. And if states didn't want to participate, the federal government did it for them. They set up marketplaces so people could buy a so-called, bronze, silver, gold, and platinum plan. So you can pay in more. And this is the marketplace that the Inflation Reduction Act subsidizes. That's the one I was talking about at the very beginning. And it makes those plans more affordable. Now, your question is, is it the case that people, face these dreadful circumstances? And the answer is overwhelmingly yes. Not as much in Medicare, but definitely in both Medicaid and in the individual and work insurance markets. Because those plans are so variegated, they come with terms that can be, to say the least, stressful. So they can come with a deductible, for instance. That's one of the ways insurance companies get around paying out huge deductibles on these plans, to the point of it being useless. So, if your deductible is several $1,000s, your incentive for actually accessing the healthcare system is pretty low. So, you got that shoulder out of place, well, crack it back into place rather than going to see the doctor and just hope it heals.
I always use the example of your auto insurance, right? Like, if you're looking, if you're looking at that 15-year-old truck, your deductibles, you're going to make them really high because you figure if something happens, well, I'm not going to put all this money into it. Now, when you do that with your body and your own health, it's a different story. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. No, it's right.
you want to keep
It's
your
right. Now,
premiums low. But, if you end up getting some kind of cardiovascular disease, you don't want your deductibles to be anywhere over like $2,000. You know what I mean?
now it was interesting that you mentioned the single payer system earlier, right? And you wanted to see what are the similarities. Now the similarity is initially to the original Medicare program, the original what's called traditional Medicare in the United States. That was a federally funded program, a single payer. And, it was a fee for service. So you could, under traditional Medicare, go to any provider in the country and your federal Medicare would pay for that. That's why, Sanders et al. Moved for Medicare for all, right? Because that's expanding a single healthcare payer. Now, it gets very complicated after this because we tend to think of, well, Medicaid is the same and Medicare is that way across the board. But in fact, it's not. And this relates to what you're talking about with the deductibles and the costs. George Bush Jr. didn't invent this, but he put it on steroids in the Medicare Modernization Act. He took Medicare and he started creating a system called Medicare Advantage, and that's Medicare Part C in the United States. Medicare is broken down into 4 different parts. Medicare Part C allows people who are on Medicare to choose the private market instead of the government as a payer. So that's where you get the commercials with Joe Namath and JJ Walker. And so you can go to United and say, look, am I eligible in this county? They'll say yes. And then they receive the premium payment from the government for you. And they offer you then, some stepped up services. But of course, what they do is they create a healthcare network. So suddenly with a fee for service system in which you could go to any provider, now you're in a network. Now you have to follow a set of very particular rules around care. You can go to certain doctors, you can go to certain specialists.
Okay. I want to insert something that's desperately needed here. Okay. People, see how we basically been talking here? This is why we need to be aware of what's going on in this country about health.
In Canada, you mean?
Because
yes.
you see, like, this is the smoke screen that could be thrown in front of you. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. And the point I'm trying to make here is, if you're a citizen of the United States and you're thinking of voting, what should you fight for and what shouldn't you fight for? I'm asking you.
Well, I in terms of healthcare, you mean?
In terms of everything you just explained here at this point.
I think absolutely every one part of, all of these systems in their current form need to be salvaged for now. But ultimately, the move has to be towards making these systems equivalent. That is to say, if I'm getting, healthcare on the individual marketplace, it should be comparable with the service that is afforded by fee-for-service in traditional Medicare. And the hope is, from the standpoint of somebody who, looks at healthcare in the United States and got kind of excited in 2023 when the uninsurance rate went down to 8% in the United States, where it's never been in history. Right, the IRA actually got some 20 million people more on healthcare rolls. That's in addition to the 20 million that Obamacare put on. It is huge, but the hope ultimately for me is that it graduates. Sanford Schramm calls this radical incrementalism. that small changes then create a platform for a later change.
Talking like that. Radical incrementalism.
Yeah. I know that. I know that's not a popular way of talking on the left, but or at least on the radical left. But it's in relation to healthcare, there are so many interests in the United States that intervene in this debate that the possibilities for a sea change all at once are simply shy of revolution. That is never going to happen.
This is pivotal. This is so crucial to understand, right? So, I think let me translate Roddy's talk into my F-bomb talk. Okay, this idea. Okay, no. And it's like
Color it up, Julian. Color it up.
Keep like this is why Bernie Sanders' consumption of healthcare might not be the one that we have here in Canada, and it might not be the best one, but it is the only fucking thing on the table, right? Because this is in the backdrop of a fucking government right now under Trump that wants to obliterate this. They want to obliterate healthcare. They want to obliterate Social Security. They want to obliterate, forget unemployment insurance, food stamps. They want to dismantle the administrative state. You know, there was a great term that Margaret Thatcher once used to describe what Pinochet was doing in Chile. Okay, you ready for this? The Pinochet government was turning proletarians into proprietors. Okay, do you understand what that means, people? That means that everything will be privatized. Everything. Okay.
Yeah, they used to tell us the same thing when I worked in a restaurant, that, you know, your little section is your own little business.
Yeah, exactly. Remember office work? You're not wearing your cheer. You should be wearing your cheer. I recommend that everybody go out and watch that movie just for that scene where Jennifer Aniston shows up with like 16 buttons and what is your cheer? And exactly, your little booths, your section of 3 booths, that is your private little business. It's fucking unbelievable. Yeah. This is the mind of these fuckers like Paul Ryan, Scott Walker,
and that's precisely what I mean, Paul. Yeah, I mean, you raised Paul Ryan, and that's precisely what Paul Ryan, and you know, that kind of, that's a segue to our next question, but I don't want to quite get there yet. But Paul Ryan, you know, his budget plan was to introduce a voucher system for both Social Security and for Medicare
and education, which, by the way, I forgot to mention, is another the Department of Education,
which is already happening.
It's not happening. The Department of Education is already gone. Okay, and they want to privatize that. You know, but this is really important because this is where all that fucking, you know, that ideology of what's her name, the one, the Atlas Shrugged there, the Ayn Rand kind of nonsense of like the privatization, the individual objectivism. This is where it all comes from. Okay, like you should be responsible. This is, you know what, I want to say the book here. 1995, John Ralston Saul comes out with the Unconscious Civilization lectures. Okay, on the CBC lectures, there's 5 of them. John Ralston Saul, you know, a lot of lefties don't like him because he's one of these dissenting liberals, and they can go fuck themselves as far as I'm concerned. Because I've never read a book that basically kind of saw the kind of massive, like shall we say, scorched earth policies of the right coming down the pike the way he did. And he based it out of this kind of idea of two. I mean, one of my favorite, whipping boys or whipping whatever. Okay, this comes out of this kind of idea of the rugged individualism based out of a certain kind of Calvinism or Protestantism. Okay, that you're responsible for yourself. Okay.
Oh, that's such a good segue to what I want to like. Just
I wrote something down about Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan is a compulsively lying, arrested adolescent muppet whose sheltered fucking mind is still blown by Atlas Shrugged, by Ayn Rand, and also for all you fucking Led Zeppelin assholes, Stairway to Heaven, okay?
Okay, you're making friends for us. Like, it's just crazy. It's crazy.
And Led Zeppelin and all that bullshit fascist rock, okay? Go ahead.
All right. So if you think Medicare is, if Medicare provoked that in you, Medicaid gets, it takes it to another level completely. And the reason it takes it to another level completely, well, there's 2 reasons. One, as you say, it's a federal state division. But more important than that, I think, because it's a redistributive program. It's very different from Medicare and Social Security in that regard. You know, those programs, they have such solid political support because, you know, everybody puts something in and everybody gets something back.
Okay, please, you know, get that going because that's Keynesianism.
Yes, that's right. But redistributive programs have a different tenor, right? they come out of general revenues, right? They don't come out of this sectioned off trust fund. They come fully out of general revenues, and they're means tested, as you said, right? That is to
and
say,
also, they're based on economies of scale. Okay. And
yes,
please
but
explain
but more importantly, they're
yeah,
redistributed.
but please explain that to me. It's like getting wages pinned to production. Okay. Right.
Sorry, I misunderstood you
Well,
there.
it's like it's commensurate to the size of the market.
Yes, that's right, but it's they're. I mean, it's a standard social program in the sense that everybody pays in. But of course, in the general taxation system, you pay in on a progressive basis. It's not a flat rate. You pay on a progressive basis based on your income. And when that money comes out and only goes to a select part of the population, the feeling is then that is a social transfer, right? I'm paying in, but I'm not getting anything back. And that's that guy you ran into. I never get anything from me. That's the notion that Medicaid carries, right? And that makes it politically a much more vulnerable target.
Well, I mean, but this is the problem, right? And I think that this is where we have to get into this for our listeners. This idea, this is what is pushing the discussions in the United States. Okay, this is reminds me of something I posted on Facebook the other day where I said, like, a white guy, Hispanic guy, a black guy, and an Asian guy walk into the bar. They're all given $500 from some government program. The white guy goes, well, why are they getting the same as much as me? Cut the whole program. Nobody gets anything, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, this is really important because, I mean, this is why we never get off. Like, I was going to say off square one, but I'll be even cruder. We never get up on our hind legs. Okay.
Well, it forms the basis. I mean, we're seeing it right now with the Trump administration, right? All the claim to corruption, all the claim to dead people getting benefits, all the claim, it's the idea that the
race element here too, right? You know what I mean?
Yes, there is. Yes, there is. But I'm saying this has been this language has been around Medicaid and other social welfare programs for a long, long time. That those who are getting these particular redistributive benefits are undeserving, right? They're not working for, and they're being awarded these benefits. That's the sort of image that's portrayed of these beneficiaries. And again, that makes it from state to state, that makes it an increasingly vulnerable target, particularly in the southeast.
And the interesting part here, and then I'm going to make a request from you, but I want to get this point in before I do. The interesting part here is that this is where you get that red state, blue state dynamic. And Absolutely. The blue states, which are incredibly well off, because, basically that's where, the blue states are essentially the states where a lot of quote unquote, the new American industries are, like, the high tech industries, and they're generating wealth. They're, within the federal systems, their, shall we say, transfer payments, that's the way we would know them here in Canada, basically go to subsidize these red states who are like virulent in their opposition to these government programs. And a lot of it is sold back to them, particularly at the level of the control of women's bodies, okay, with the health. And secondly, in terms of race, right? Black and brown people don't get, and there's a long history, believe it or not. I mean, the idea of getting rid of a nationally funded healthcare system actually is based in racist freaking opposition. You can read this for you.
Oh, it goes even worse than that, Julian. It's much worse than you think.
Eugenics, actually.
It's much worse than you think it is, because each of these states negotiates. These states negotiate the terms of Medicaid with the federal government. Now, the federal government, the CMS, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, now run by the illustrious Dr. Oz.
Dr. fucking Oz, for Christ.
I know.
It's like I can't even. In a windstorm. He couldn't organize a trip to the fucking bathroom.
I know. But in these negotiations, these states can ask for exceptions. These are called Section 115 waivers, and they allow states to tailor their Medicaid programs in ways that are exceptional from federal regulations. Now, under the first Trump administration, he let them go hog wild. But they didn't complete them in time, and Biden reversed all those Section 115 waivers. Why? Because they involved premiums. They involved workfare. You had to prove that you were working in order to get Medicaid.
This is central, eh? This workfare is almost...
This is absolutely central. And this is, again, something that Trump is going to be able to do that's under the radar.
Yeah. Right? Tell people what workfare is, because I don't think they know what a lot of our listeners might not.
So workfare is the idea that if you are going to receive a benefit, you have to demonstrate that you're working a stipulated number of hours a week, or that you are in a training program, or that you are actively searching for work. And this is, absolutely obstructive for very large portions of the Medicaid population. Yeah, no, it's very much that. And, there's lots of other tricks they pull. They create premiums, and then they say, if you don't meet your premiums, then you're locked out. They have all kinds of tricks. When I lived in Tennessee, the Tennessee government was engaged in creating effectively a block grant from the federal government. And the federal government negotiated with them to say, well, if you save money on Medicaid, you can move it over to your other programs. You don't have to spend it on Medicaid. Well, the state legislature just went like this. Oh, lots of extra money, lots of extra federal dollars that we can shift over to programs we like, as opposed to Medicaid. And so they started playing all kinds of games with this.
This is the point where we have to shift this conversation, if you ask me.
I think we do.
Possibility of...
But let's sum it up. Let's just say, social policy is, positively a labyrinth in the United States. Totally. I mean, it's just layers upon layers upon layers. And what you think is public often is not as public as you think it is. And what you think is federal often is nowhere near as federal as you think it is. It's actually administered by states. And some of those states administer it, in a decent manner, and many do not.
And this is my segue, right? And the idea that it is a labyrinth is sold back by the right wing to voters as saying that's red tape, and it's all unnecessary.
Yeah.
And I want to say this is important, right? Because what we get here is like that the right, the conservatives across the world, Canada, the United States, Great Britain, always speak like as if they know how the economy is run, and they're experts, and so on and so on and so forth. Nothing could be fucking further from the truth. Like, if you look, the evidence is overwhelming of administration after administration, in country after country, in district after district, in state or province after province, that once conservatives are in government, they fucking destroy the economy. What they're good at is transferring wealth, okay? Particularly from the poor sectors to the richer sectors, in this idea of trickle-down economics, which from Ricardo, it hasn't worked. Like, it's like, that kind of internalized comparative or competitive advantage. Mm-hmm. But here's the fucking deal, okay? There is a huge discussion right now, particularly within the Democratic Party, about how to reimagine policy around social services or social policy. And you mentioned Klein and his last name. The other guy is his last name Marshall? I can't remember.
I can't remember. Sorry, off the top of my head.
But anyways, Ezra Klein has co-written this book called Abundance, which looks at the fact that this idea which is again what the right wings have been using in terms of this idea of the labyrinth. They've been using this idea for this Malthusian, scarcity. No, there's a scarcity of resources. There's nothing but we don't have the money for this. And they are right on when they say, no, that's bullshit. There is a lot of money out there. It's just not being given to the people who have created the wealth, right? And they're not getting it back. It's just ending up in the pockets. And I want to say this because this is the thing that I was watching this morning is that I'm going to try to pronounce his name. Jacob Auchincloss. Okay, he's the U.S. representative from Massachusetts 4th Congressional District. Okay, keep an eye on this guy because to our lefty friends, this guy would sound like Carney. Okay, you know what I mean? Some right of center kind of bureaucrat. Like they would. But I think that this guy is coming up. Like if you listen to him speak, okay. He speaks with an authoritativeness. He knows, like, he's not afraid, okay, in what he's going to say and how he's presenting these policies. Like, he has a plan. It's very detailed and it's very confident. Like, if you were to ask him, okay, like, not like if you were to run as president, but if you ask him, if you were president, what would you do? This guy has detailed answers and they make a lot of sense. Okay? Some of them are not agreeable, right? But that's not the whole real rule of politics is to be compromised, is to compromise. Contrast him with Gretchen Whitmer, who I really had high hopes for. Okay? And as soon as she was asked about questions like this, she basically hid behind, like, the flag or something. And, she had to go ask 50 advisors about what her position was on this, right? And this is the thing that I have hope. When you listen to the policy wing, the policy wonks on the Democrat, and that's a spectrum, right? Where you have, I would say, Alkenklaas in the kind of like center right of this position, but he's got real good ideas for redistribution of wealth, right down to AOC and members of the squad, who also have really detailed policies. You can see that there's real thought here. But what do we get instead? Okay, like I'm looking for my keys and I don't have them here. You get the goddamn right wingers. They rattle the keys about trans questions and culture wars, and boom, all of the social justice warriors come out. They skew the discussion, and they don't talk about anything that Roddy just regaled you with, because it's easier to engage in those discussions over culture wars. And here's the fucking part. You lose every time you engage in culture wars. Okay?
Yeah. But I think they're doing something extra in relation to social policy this time around. I think that they're,
who's doing something different?
The Republicans, that they're making a move in relation to social policy that they haven't done in the past. And they're doing that in the way that, with Medicaid, they've always made the claim that there is an undeserving population, right? That the claim is that there's corruption and that government-run programs are issuing benefits to populations that don't deserve it. They just glide over the fact that like over 90% of Medicaid programs are run by the private sector. That they don't make any mention of. It's all just government red tape, but the claim is corruption. With Medicare and Social Security, they've always made the claim, and Paul Ryan did this as well. It wasn't a claim about corruption. It was always a claim about fiscal sustainability, right? If we don't rearrange these programs, we're going to back ourselves into the corner on a fiscal basis. But now the Trump administration, note that they've shifted the target, right? Now Social Security is corrupt. Medicare is corrupt. Dead people are getting benefits. Immigrants are getting benefits. What they're doing, I think, is delegitimizing these programs in a way that they never did in the past, because they know they can't make the political argument against those particular contributory programs because they're run more effectively if they don't delegitimize them first. They're creating the crisis that then becomes the basis for restructuring.
100% about this. I mean, I mean, videotape this, people, cut this little clip what Roddy just said, because that's what's working. And people are buying it. The hard-working Americans are buying. They think that all of a sudden this is going to result in some kind of like massive tax cut, that they'll be out of money. Yeah. This is bullshit. First of all, what they're finding out with all of the cuts in Doge is that it's a trickle of a piss in a bucket if they were to cut what they want, compared to the subsidies that, say, Elon Musk got to build his electric cars, okay, or to any fucking industry, particularly the military-industrial complex. The amount of subsidies that goes into those mega businesses. Listen, let me just say something here, because this is my whipping. This idea that, that small businesses, okay, are the biggest fucking welfare queens in the capitalist world. The amount of tax breaks and subsidies for startups is unbelievable. The fact is that most businessmen are incompetent and they fail, okay, because they think that they can sell, catch key fucking, hey, I'm going to sell scented candles and I'm going to be a millionaire. I'm going to groom pets and I'm going to be a millionaire. They're so hard on the working man, and they don't create those high value added jobs. You know, it's industry that is subsidized. It's industry that is corrupt. It is industry that is lobbying. These things create forward and backward linkages in terms of jobs, in terms of scientific research, okay, in terms of administrative work, and then in terms of just keeping the fucking economy afloat. And this is the scary part here. They have bought into this argument that you said that they're corrupt, that they're inefficient. That's the greatest line. And nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, like, these programs are the last line of defense that's making sure that the water is here and not here. Okay?
But here, let me throw in a little twist, because I have a kind of ongoing theory about what Republicans mean when they talk about social restructuring, and in a way, it's like a bastardization of Keynes, right? Keynes is,
parentheses. Keynesianism works. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Okay. But there's this famous line where he says, "What we want is not less government, but almost certainly more." And Republicans have bastardized this in a way because they recognize, I really do think that they recognize this at a very basic level, that in the realm of social policy, one of the things government does is it mobilizes people around payment and savings, right? It brings people in to pay for or save for things that they otherwise would not do. Healthcare, Social Security. And if you just left it to the open society, of course, some would, but many, many wouldn't. And you wouldn't have this agglomeration of interests. And so government brings all of this wealth together. And you can do two things with that. You could unleash it on the market, or you could set up a social programs like Social Security, a fairly simple, straightforward, pay in, federally controlled and federally regulated system. Or you can start to create complex systems, right? Like Medicare Advantage, or like Medicaid, states paying private companies to administer Medicaid systems. And that's actually what I think is going on here. Republicans don't want to dismantle these programs. They don't want to get rid of these programs. What they want to do is transform these programs. They want to take this incredible government organizing mechanism and reroute that social wealth through private channels. That's what they're doing in Medicare Advantage, which I'll tell you now, Medicare has 67 million enrollees. What do you think the percentage of those enrollees is under private insurance?
For sure over 60%.
Well, close, like 54%. 54%, which is astounding because, just 20 years ago, the number was like 18%.
That's the friends who are getting the contracts. I mean, that's what's going on in Canada. I mean, you take a look at all these P3s that take on in Canada. These are usually people who donated money to the Conservatives of the Liberal Party, and then they got a nice little deal later, right? I mean, that's how this fucking goddamn pluralistic system works. But here's the thing that drives me fucking crazy. Look, you're batting 1,000 today, by the way, brother. I'm really enjoying listening to you, man. Like, I'm actually fact checking you to make sure that I'm with the thing as I'm going along, because I got 3 screens open here, right? And I mean, you're bad, but this is it. One of the things that just people don't understand, like you said, they don't want to get rid of it, they want to change it, right? But it's the discourse that surrounds, okay? And they're appealing, let's be honest here, okay? Let's be fucking dirtily bad. It is the most Protestant language you will ever hear. But individual responsibility, individual collectability, self-loathing. You are bad. You are bad people. You spend too much money. You shouldn't be going out on Friday night and spending money on liquor and drugs and all. And because of that, we all got a debt. And all your fucking generations next come, they're going to have to pay for you. So just your job.
But the reality, I mean, that's been in health for a long time. But, the reality is, I mean, I will argue that the United States doesn't have a spending problem.
I'm with Bill Hicks on this. Like, I'll tighten my belt as long as it's around Newt Gingrich's neck. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? Yeah, like, and I mean, like, but this is it. Like, I mean, what I find crazy about this is that people just buy this. They buy it hook, line, and sinker. And it's all a bunch of males usually, like work really hard, blah blah blah. But this is bullshit. You don't realize that if we pull this rug from underneath you, then you're truly fucked. And I mean, I want to share a little bit of a personal anecdote here. Like I got my sister. My sister has some health concerns, and she has a son with special needs, and like they live in the periphery, okay, Northern Ontario, where the services aren't. Compared to what we have here, it's night and day. Talk to any of my friends in Sudbury. Talk to any of my friends in Sudbury who have, or in Northern Ontario, who have any health issues. What it's like to see a doctor. What it's like to get into an emergency section. An emergency ward for like the waiting the waiting times are 18 to 32 hours, for crying out loud. That's unbelievable.
Right. And just to bring it back to our topic at hand, I mean, if that's the case in Canada, well, look south if you want an example of what happens if you let these systems creep in, because, Sudbury at least has hospitals. There are lots and lots of rural areas in the United States that just don't have hospitals, or their hospitals are closing. Why are they closing? Because Medicaid is being shut down, and Medicaid is the program that is making payments to those hospitals called disproportionate share payments that, they fund hospitals that take on a lot of low income patients who don't, who can't pay deductibles.
I have bad knees. Okay. Several years ago, I ruptured my other ACL. Okay. I had to walk around with a ruptured ACL and this was like 2002. That's 23 years ago. I had to walk around with a ruptured ACL for 7.5 months before I got to see a specialist. And then another 6 months later before I got the surgery. Okay. And I don't think it's gotten any better. I don't think it's gotten any better in terms of waiting times. Okay. So, I mean, and I mean, this is what we're talking about. And one of the things that
well, but it's variegated in the States, right? I mean, there is excellent care in the United States
amazing.
if you have, if you have an upper level insurance plan. But if you don't,
with your partner, between your partner, if you're taking in as much as $450,000 a year, you're just fine. Okay.
Sure. You're receiving excellent care, but the vast majority of Americans either bypass care because it's just too expensive to take on, or the care that they receive is going to be subjected to the same kinds of constraints that you're finding across the board in Canada, right? I mean, in Canada, it's a generalized problem, right? Everybody faces that problem. But in the United States, it's highly variegated based on your income class. You can, again, if you have the right insurance, you will receive excellent and immediate.
There's the dynamic too that if chances are you have a highly professionalized job and you're in that income bracket of like whatever, like $400,000-$300,000 a year, you're also going to have an insurance program that reflects that. I was listening to one of those former attorney generals speaking with John Heilman a couple of weeks ago, I think, and she was saying something to the effect that when she was working for the DC, the federal government's district attorney, she was working for a DG at some state level, high level, and she didn't want to leave the job because these are people who are making like $250,000 a year, maybe even a little bit more. Don't want to leave the job because she didn't want to lose the health benefits because she had a special needs child. Okay?
Which is extraordinary.
And they're like, these are people you would think, they're not of modest means, right? But I want to go back to just one thing because, again, I want to try to kind of drill it home to our listeners and the people who are watching this. You talk about this labyrinth, right? And it's easy. I find it remarkable and astonishing how people will buy into the argument that it's all corrupt, that it's all bureaucracy, that it's all red tape, it's all inefficient. And you contrast this with France. Okay? In the late 1990s, I was in France, and the CGT still had like a big high profile, and they had posters everywhere. I have the posters. I still have the posters. One of the posters was basically, the translation was, social services, defend them. Okay? And if you sat around and you talked to people, that was the thing, saying, yeah, okay, it might be a mess, but you know what? It's our mess. And it's keeping us, it's why we get 5 weeks off. It's why we got doctors who still give house calls, okay? And it's why we're paying 50% tax and we don't give a shit because it's ours, okay? You know, like, and the idea that to make them efficient first and then we'll defend them, it was the other way around, buddy. You know, defend them, and once we keep them, well, we'll try to make
and define efficiency. Just to close this up, I mean, keep in mind, you know, through all this discussion, we haven't really talked about the global. The United States pays by far more per capita for healthcare than any other country on the planet. They pay now over $13,000 per capita for their healthcare in the United States. The comparable figure in any other OECD country is half of that. So, you know, if we claim efficiency within this system, efficiency for whom, right? Efficiency in terms of garnering, you know, high-tech care and high profits. Sure, it's efficient. Is it actually efficient in terms of delivering care? No. Not only do Americans pay twice as much for care, but they fall at the lower end of OECD indicators for health across the board. The United States has the highest maternal mortality rate in the OECD.
And you know, you drive into Cowshit Valley, just north here of Ottawa, right? And you sit down at some of the diners, and you know, this is what they'll tell you. They'll say, "Yeah, man, I want quality health care," and I'm looking at them. And I go, "You got no health care to begin with, right?" I mean, like this reminds me of this quote that I once read by William Pitt. Okay, and he goes, "Necessity is the plea for every infringement of human freedom. It is the argument of tyrants. It is the creed of slaves."
There you go. That's where we should. That's a good spot to wrap it up. That's that note of crisis.
Yeah, well, I mean, I find myself calling people slaves and peasants a lot these days, man. Myself included. Okay, because it's like it's just remarkable what we will buy. Okay, like I mean, like what we will buy from like particularly the right wing, and I don't know whether it's hatred or fear or a combination of both of this fear and loathing, but it's just not right because. And you know what? Like, to be honest with you, and I'm sure you'll agree, we just scraped the surface today and some of the.
Oh, I think no question, no question. I mean, you can't cover all of this in adequate depth, but we gave it our best go.
Well, I mean, I want to end with one more thing. Okay, I remember back when the common sense revolution took hold. Okay, in Ontario.
Oh, only a select number of people are going to know what that is.
Mike Harris came to power in Ontario in the mid-'90s. I think it was 95. He won an election, and he ran on this platform called the Common Sense Revolution, which was basically we're just gonna slash all the welfare, all the social services, and we're gonna streamline healthcare. We're gonna privatize the inefficiencies and blah 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 blah. And that's 6 months after it happened, people drank water in Walkerton and they fucking, like, what was it? Like something like 8 of them died. Dozens were afflicted for the rest of their lives. But the thing that always got me was a conversation I had with this Palooka who made a lot of money up in Sudbury as a bonus miner. I won't mention his name. And I remember saying, I said, "So why did you vote? Why did you vote for Mike Harris?" And he goes, "Because I got a $250 tax cut." And it would struck me like a lightning bolt because I said, and there was the closure of emergency wards across Northern Ontario. That's what it was worth.
Yeah.
$250. And he drove one of those big F10 pickup trucks, right? And I asked him, I go, "How much does it cost you to fill up that tank of gas there?" He goes, $90. $90 fucking dollars. This is like 1998. Okay. So I said, you basically sold out your health care in an emergency ward for 2.5 tanks of gas. And this is it, man. Quantify your choices, people. Quantify your choices. Yeah. It's really easy. It's that easy. It's not that difficult. Remember what?
I think you're right.
Remember the argument of tyrants. That's necessity, and the creed of slaves.
All right, let's leave it there. Until next week. Bye, all.
I didn't get a chance to go to the liquor store to get some beer. I noticed you were sipping the beer. I got there too early today. I was up and about way too early.
Well, there's always next
Okay.
week. Well,
Take care.
ciao.